let's discuss the Gibson Les Paul Studio, shall we? The Studio was introduced near the end of the Norlin era. It first appeared in 1983, and it was another attempt to bridge the market with players who wanted a Les Paul but couldn't quite afford one, because for about a decade Gibson had been fighting off low-cost imports that looked very much like their flagship electric. Many of those were made in Japan with fairly high standards of workmanship. And the question becomes, how do you compete with Japanese instruments by offering a guitar that looks like the one they're copying, which is the one that you make, without undercutting yourself? It's not easy. The Studio tries by keeping all of the essentials, but dispensing with things like headstock inlays and binding on both the fretboard and the body. The bodies were also slightly narrower than a standard, so they could source wood that was 1/4 of an inch thinner. Saves a few bucks. Maple caps were often 3-piece rather than book-matched, and they were plain maple usually, but not always. Over the years, though, they've kind of morphed. They added things like the Studio Custom, which did have a single ply of binding on the front side. The bodies, by the way, in 1983 and 84 were made from alder, which is a softer, much lighter wood, from which many Strats were made. But apparently Gibson had problems finishing alder, and they went back to mahogany. So if you run the numbers, there's very little difference between these and what we might call the real thing, beyond what's necessary to offer customers more choice. And at scale, they probably don't save all that much money, labor costs being what they are. In the 90s, Gibson did stuff like bring out Studio models featuring alternative woods that were certified by the Rainforest Alliance. They called those the Smartwood series. There are a number of those. There were goth models, special colors like the Gem series. That's G-E-M, not J-E-M, not to be confused with Ibanez. If anything, they're a way for Gibson to make something different that doesn't conform to the hidebound vintage look that, if we're honest, they're saddled with, you know? So many people want the instrument to look like it was made in 1955 or 1959 or 57. In the end, I tend to think of them as a Les Paul with less binding, because there's enough variation in the Studio line now that it's hard to get more specific than that. This example is from 1995. This is not relict. This is authentic playware. It's been played. The frets in the lower positions are getting a bit worn, but rather than doing a partial refret, the owner would like to change them all out for gold frets to match the rest of the color scheme here, black and gold all over. We can extend that to the frets themselves. So yeah, it's another refret video. I think I mentioned pretty recently that gold-plated hardware on guitars does not stay gold for very long. It almost immediately starts breaking down because we're constantly rubbing things against it, sweaty things or abrasive things. And gold plating tends to be very thin, just the way it is. So usually if a guitar is 30 years old, you'll end up with a mismatch of, you know, there's a brand new bridge next to a quite old looking stop bar. And look at the corrosion in there, huh? Wow. So, you know, you have to consign yourself to the fact that this is what's going to happen, you know. I don't know if it looks as elegant as nickel hardware that's been run through the mill a few times, but it is what it is. Some people find this evocative. In its current configuration, this thing is set up with exceptionally low action. It is 1/32 of an inch across the board, which is 2/64, 31 thousandths, 0.8 millimeters. Yeah, it's not functional for bends. I don't think it's actually functional at all in its current state. I think we want just a little bit higher action. Frets are fairly large. not quite super jumbo frets. They're like 105 thousandths wide by somewhere around 40 thousandths tall. So big, but not huge. Look at it. So pretty. Do you expect me to fret, Goldfinger? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to slide. So this is not real gold. I'm sorry to disappoint you. In the 2000s, a company called Jesker came out with gold-colored wire. I say Jesker, but I don't actually know that it isn't pronounced Yesker. I've never heard anyone else say it. The wire was branded EVO Gold, EVO or EVO, and that stands for extra virgin olive. It was developed in conjunction with American cooking program host Rachel Ray, who was looking for a fret that tastes great, even if it has a low smoke point. In truth, it was designed to meet the needs of people who have a nickel allergy. Standard fret wire is about 18% nickel, and some folks are sensitive enough to that it'll cause eczema-like reactions to the skin on their hands. It's very nasty. We've dealt with that before, I think. EVO alloy had iron, copper, titanium, but no nickel, so it wouldn't cause that. It was harder than standard wire, but not as hard as stainless. And EVO, as far as I can tell, isn't actually an acronym. It's just EVO. EVO. Sounds wicked bad, man. However, about 4 years ago, Jesker discontinued it. I don't know why. But people stockpiled as much as they could. It's pretty rare to find now. However, Stuart McDonald came out with their own gold-colored wire a year or two ago, and this is actually the first time I get to use it. It's definitely more expensive than standard wire, but it is golden. This is made in Japan, it says. It's not as gold as some gold. This is a little more like rose gold or kind of bronzy cast to it, but it'll do. So this is an instance where the new frets are going to be just slightly narrower than the original ones. So I want them to come out as cleanly as possible, taking my time. This is ebony, which is now 30 years old. It is a bit chippier than some examples, and I'm doing my best to, keep that in check. You can see that they're coming out reasonably clean. Not too bad. I'm always looking for little tags that sort of detach, usually at the ends of the frets here. I'll hit them with some super glue before they can get lost. I will remove the nut because this board is going to require some resurfacing. Adjusting the neck as straight as it can go and using a notch straight edge to map it out, I see something that's not great. This is an exaggeration of what I've been seeing. You can see there's a classic double hump situation where we've got a rise around fret 2 and then a valley. That next rise between frets 7 and about 14 is quite difficult to deal with because the string has no clear path up to the bridge. You're always going to be noting out. I need to lower the neck pickup out of the way so I won't be bumping into it with a sanding beam.
It's bad. It's suspect. Commenting on a YouTube video. If you comment on YouTube videos, I don't want to meet you. Never mind.
This is 220 grit self-adhesive paper, which is not super aggressive. It takes some time, but it's not going to introduce super deep scratches into the ebony or the inlay, which in this case is pearloid plastic. That stuff is fairly thick, which might not be the case with real pearl. Sometimes it's pretty thin, and I might be in danger of sanding through, in which case I would have to remove the inlays with steam, level, and then recut the inlay pockets to proper depth. I put a radius on the fret wire, and here I'm using some alcohol to clean off the machining grunge. And as usual, I cut alternating lengths of fret wire for frets 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., and then come back and do 2, 4, 6, and 8. This allows me to get all of the frets I need from 2 lengths of wire rather than going into a third. The chip out areas were filled with ebony dust and super glue, and here I'm using a razor blade scraper to level them with the surface of the board. Then I'll sand back up with progressively finer grits of sandpaper. I'll make sure all of the slots are an appropriate depth. Before trying to install frets, I'll lightly chamfer the top of the slot, which makes entry easier and removal more clean if necessary. I'll clip the ends of the frets, even though this isn't a bound job. It just makes things easier to deal with, especially with the old chippy finish. We'll file the last little bit smooth. This wire is, I think, a little bit harder than standard fret wire. It's nowhere near stainless though. I'll bonk the frets into place, starting with their ends. A couple taps in the center just to make sure it's seated. Give it a wipe because there is a little bit of fish glue in the slot. I'll grab my fret jaws and give it a squeeze to make sure it's properly seated. I'll address the ends of the frets very formally. This will get rid of the overhang and also produce a nice neat bevel. In a case like this, where the new wire is slightly narrower than the old, I'll go ahead and wick some thin CA glue along the sides. This fills in any of the residual divots from the old tangs and seals them off so finger oils and grunge don't get down in there. I'll also seal off the ends of the slots using some thicker CA glue. Because I've just leveled the board, leveling the fret tops is very easy. It takes just one or two little passes. That also means that recrowning is a very quick process. Polishing, polishing, polishing. Have to make them glitter, even though they are not gold. Take care of the sharp corners. So this is getting a brass nut. I'd forgotten just how long it takes to make one of these things from scratch. It's not so very different from bone or plastic, it just takes longer. Here I'm scribing a line above the one I just traced. This will give me some thickness to work with. I feel like a character in one of those vocational films from the 1940s. I mean, a lot of this shaping would be easier if I had a Bridgeport mill. Brass as a material is soft enough that you can use standard woodworking tools on it. It's not great on the tools, but you can do it. When I put strings on, I find it pulls up into a very nice 6/1000ths relief. The nut slots, of course, are still just a little bit too tall. Too much gap between the string and the first fret when I'm pressing at the third fret means that the notes can be pulled sharp. So I dial them in carefully using the nut files. I like to see a gap of about 21 or 22 thousandths when the string isn't being depressed. I'll remove excess material using a sanding block. I don't want more than about half the string diameter sitting in the nut for the lower strings. Yeah, I know it's not an approved filing technique. Trying to soften everything, make it feel friendly upon the fingers. So get that installed and it kind of looks the part. I will say that the Stumac gold frets are not quite as gold as the old EVO frets were, but they seem to be good quality.